Well, sentencing is set to begin today for disgraced Army Sergeant Bergdahl. His fate being decided just days after he said the Taliban is more honest than the U.S. Army. Telling UK Sunday Times magazine, quote, "At least the Taliban were honest enough to say, I'm the guy who's going to cut your throat." Here now to weigh in on that, President of the Security Studies Group and former U.S. Army Special Forces, Jim Hanson. Jim, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Good to be with you, Heather.
So I'll just go away right away. Your response to that comment.
You know, I don't know what Bergdahl expects to happen when a deserter comes back and pleads guilty to leaving his unit during wartime. What did he want, a welcome home cake? You know, there's a real easy way to avoid bad treatment when you come home. Don't desert in the first place.
Yeah, and then in his 5 years, I think it was, of captivity by the Taliban, he was held in a cage.
I'm pretty sure we're not suspending him in a cage outside in the winter, you know, to let him freeze to death. He's got a nice warm cell. He's getting fed 3 hots and a cot every day. And the idea that that's worse than what the Taliban was doing, which included beating him with copper cables until he couldn't walk, is absurd. This kid's got a messed up head, but the bottom line is he's been found to be coherent enough to know that when he left his unit, he knew what he was doing.
So
he's made up a lot of reasons of why. None of them cover it.
Yeah, he certainly has. And, you know, he's, expected to appear for sentencing today. He could face life in prison. What do you think will happen?
I think he'll probably get life in prison, and he earned it, and he can stop whining about it then, although from what we saw with Chelsea Manning, I don't know that that ever turned out. I don't think President Trump's going to cut him loose, though.
So let's talk now about the latest going on in Syria. Their largest oil field has, from ISIS, we've successfully taken it back, defeating the terror group also in Raqqa. Explain the importance of what's going on there now.
The oil field's important because they made a lot of money selling oil. That was a large part of how they financed their operations, how they financed the Islamic State, their caliphate. Now that they've been cut down in Raqqa, they're gone from that city. That's no longer their capital, and they no longer have a way to go ahead and pay people. Foreign fighters are not going to come there to help them. You know, they basically have lost a massive defeat both to their operations and in the propaganda war. Their recruiting is going to go down, and this is going to deal a serious blow to them.
Yeah, who do you credit with the strides that we seem to be taking now in terms of combating ISIS, specifically in Syria?
I think this is a direct result of President Trump's renewed focus and changes to our rules of engagement. He allowed our troops to actually do what they needed to do. He allowed them to target ISIS locations, whereas previously they'd been forbidden to do that if there was any possibility of civilian casualties. He cut loose the dogs of war, and now we've defeated one of the worst enemies U.S. troops have faced. It's a credit to him.
So that then leads to this question. You know, we seized their largest oil field. We capture Raqqa, their assumed capital, but we're not hearing a lot about it.
That's because the rest of the media is not real interested in anything that reflects well on President Trump or the military in that case. You know, this was a huge victory for the troops. It's a huge victory for Trump. It's a defeat for ISIS. None of that really works with the other media outlet narrative that everything President Trump does is awful. So I think they'll ignore it, and they'll try to do things like ridiculous talk about the ambush in Niger.
All right. Jim Hanson joining us. Well, we're talking about it, nevertheless. Thank you very much for joining us this morning.